The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Lancaster mansion, casting golden rectangles across the marble floor. Elena Reyes stood motionless in the service hallway, her heart pounding against her ribs as the echo of laughter still rang in her ears. She looked down at her shoes, the same pair she had worn for 3 years, the leather cracked at the seams, the soles thin enough to feel every cold tile beneath her feet. Those shoes had carried her through countless shifts, through sleepless nights, through the quiet dignity of honest work. And now, in front of a dozen guests, they had become a spectacle. Bradley Lancaster III, the 24-year-old heir to the Lancaster fortune, had pointed at her feet with a champagne flute in his hand. His friends had gathered around him like a pack of hyenas, their laughter sharp and cruel. He had asked her to turn around slowly, to show everyone what real poverty looked like. Elena had stood there, frozen, her tray of appetizers, trembling in her hands. She had not cried, she had not spoken, she had simply waited until the moment passed, then retreated to the service corridor where no one could see her shame. Now, alone in the dim hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken in Spanish when Elena was just a child. Dignity is not something they can take from you, mija. It is something you choose to keep. She repeated those words silently, letting them steady her breath. She would not let Bradley Lancaster steal what her grandmother had given her. Elena Reyes was 26 years old, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who had crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination. Her father had worked construction until his back gave out. Her mother cleaned offices at night while Elena was in school. They had sacrificed everything so their daughter could have a better life, and Elena had promised herself she would make them proud. She had studied business administration at a community college while working 2 jobs. She had dreams of opening her own small bakery someday, a place where people like her could find warmth and belonging. But dreams cost money, and money was something Elena never had enough of. The Lancaster mansion was the largest private residence in the state. It sat on a hill overlooking the city, its white columns and sprawling gardens a testament to generational wealth. Elena had worked there for 2 years, hired as part of the catering staff for events and parties. The pay was decent, the hours long, and the treatment varied depending on who was hosting. When Margaret Lancaster, the matriarch, was in charge, the staff was treated with quiet respect. But when Bradley took over for his mother's social gatherings, everything changed. Bradley Lancaster was handsome in the way that money could make anyone handsome. He had tailored suits, perfect teeth, and the arrogance of someone who had never been told no. He treated the staff like furniture, invisible until he needed something to mock. Eleanor had learned to stay out of his way, to keep her head down and her movements efficient. But tonight, she had made the mistake of walking too close to his circle of friends, and he had seized the opportunity to remind everyone of the vast distance between them. The door at the end of the hallway opened, and Elena straightened immediately, expecting the head of catering to summon her back to work. Instead, she saw a man she did not recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His suit was impeccable, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes, and his presence filled the narrow corridor with an authority that made Elena's breath catch. He walked slowly, his footsteps measured and deliberate, and his eyes found hers with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. He stopped a few feet away from her and studied her face for a long moment. Elena did not look away. Something in his gaze told her that looking away would be a mistake, that this man valued directness above all else. She noticed the faint scar that ran along his left jaw, the kind of mark that spoke of a past she could not begin to imagine. His eyes were grey, the colour of storm clouds before rain, and they held a weight that suggested he had seen things most people only read about in newspapers. "You were the one in the ballroom," he said. His voice was low and calm, with the faintest trace of an accent she could not place. "The one with the shoes." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she refused to let embarrassment control her response. She lifted her chin slightly and met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said, "that was me." The man studied her for another moment, and something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Elena caught it. A flicker of respect, perhaps, or recognition of something he understood. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small business card, which he extended toward her. "My name is Dominic Vance," he said. "I have a proposition for you." Elena hesitated, her mind racing with questions and warnings. She had heard the name Vance before, whispered in corners by people who knew better than to say it too loudly. The Vance family controlled half the businesses in the city, legitimate and otherwise. They were rumored to have connections that reached into every level of power, from City Hall to the shadows where law and order did not apply. Dominic Vance was the head of that family, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm warning. "I do not get involved with people like you," Elena said carefully. "No offense intended." Dominic's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "People like me," he repeated. "And what kind of people are we?" Elena met his gaze without wavering. "The kind who make problems, disappear, the kind who have power without accountability." She paused, choosing her next words with precision. "The kind who could ruin a person's life without losing a minute of sleep." Dominic studied her for a long moment, and the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken understanding. Then he nodded slowly, as if she had passed some kind of test he had been administering without her knowledge. "You are observant," he said, "and you have courage. Those are rare qualities." He gestured toward the business card still extended in his hand. "The proposition I mentioned has nothing to do with my family's other interests. I am looking for someone to manage the household of my daughter. She is 8 years old and has been through more than any child should endure. She needs stability, kindness, and someone who will not treat her like a burden or a bargaining chip." Elena's defenses wavered slightly. She had not expected this. A child, an 8-year-old girl who needed care and protection. She thought of her own childhood, of the sacrifices her parents had made, of the love that had surrounded her even in the hardest times. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. You saw me for the first time less than 5 minutes ago." Dominic's expression shifted again, and for a moment Elena glimpsed something beneath the controlled exterior. Pain, perhaps, or regret, or the kind of weariness that came from carrying burdens no one else could see. "Because I saw what happened in that ballroom," he said. "I saw a young man with more money than character humiliate you in front of a room full of people, and I saw you stand there with dignity, without tears, without cowering, without losing the thing that makes you who you are." He paused, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. "My daughter needs someone like that. Someone who knows how to keep their dignity when the world tries to take it away." Elena looked at the business card in his hand, then back at his face. Every instinct told her to walk away, to return to the catering station, and forget this conversation ever happened. But something deeper, something she could not name, whispered that this moment might be important, that this choice might change everything. She reached out and took the card. "I will think about it," she said. Dominic nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "The address is on the card. Come tomorrow at 10 in the morning if you decide to accept. Bring nothing but yourself. Everything else will be provided." He turned and walked back down the corridor, disappearing through the door at the far end. Eleanor stood alone in the silence, holding the card between her fingers like a question she was not yet ready to answer. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Elena returned to her duties, serving champagne and canapes to guests who looked through her as if she did not exist. Bradley Lancaster continued his entertainment, surrounded by sycophants who laughed at his every joke. But something had changed inside Elena. A door had opened, and she could not pretend it was still closed. That night, she rode the bus home to the small apartment she shared with her mother. The neighborhood was modest but clean, filled with families who worked hard and looked out for each other. Her mother was already asleep when Elena arrived, exhausted from her own shift-cleaning offices downtown. Elena sat at the kitchen table in the darkness, turning the business card over and over in her hands. Dominic Vance. The name carried weight, and not all of it was good. But she kept thinking about the way he had spoken about his daughter, the way his voice had softened, the way he had looked at Elena, not as a servant or a spectacle, but as a person worthy of respect. She thought about her worn shoes and the laughter that still echoed in her ears. She thought about Bradley Lancaster and the world he represented, a world where people like her were invisible until they became convenient targets, and she thought about the possibility, however small, that somewhere in this city there might be a place where her dignity would not just be tolerated, but valued. By the time the sun rose over the rooftops, Elena had made her decision. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Every week we bring you stories of courage, transformation, and the unexpected moments that change everything. If you believe in the power of human resilience, subscribe now and join a community that celebrates the strength within us all. The address on the card led Elena to an estate on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind high walls and security gates that opened silently at her approach. A driver had been waiting for her at a designated meeting point, a quiet man in a dark suit who spoke only to confirm her identity before guiding her into a sleek black car. Elena watched through the tinted windows as the familiar streets of her neighborhood gave way to winding roads lined with trees, then to the imposing gates of the Vance compound. The main house was not what she had expected. She had imagined cold marble and sharp angles, the kind of architecture designed to intimidate. Instead, she found a sprawling residence that blended modern elegance with warmth, its walls painted in soft cream, its gardens filled with flowers that caught the morning light. The effect was deliberate, she realized. This was a home designed to feel like a sanctuary, not a fortress. A woman met her at the front door, introducing herself as Mrs. Chen, the head of household operations. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that assessed Elena with practiced efficiency. "Welcome, Miss Reyes. Mr. Vance is expecting you. Please follow me." The interior of the house continued the theme of elegant comfort. Elena noticed the details as she walked, the soft rugs, the fresh flowers in crystal vases, the paintings on the walls that depicted landscapes rather than portraits. Everything was designed to soothe, to create an atmosphere of peace. And yet, beneath the surface, she sensed the presence of something else. Security cameras discreetly positioned in corners. Staff members who moved with quiet precision. The subtle awareness that this beautiful home existed within a world of careful protection. Mrs. Chen led her to a study at the back of the house, where Dominic Vance sat behind a desk of dark wood. He rose when she entered, gesturing toward a chair across from him. "Please sit." Elena took her seat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. The morning light fell across Dominic's face, softening the hard lines she had noticed the night before. He looked tired, she realized. Not the fatigue of a sleepless night, but something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that came from years of carrying responsibilities that never lightened. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I was not certain you would." Elena met his gaze directly. "Neither was I. But I kept thinking about what you said about your daughter." Dominic nodded slowly, and for a moment his expression revealed a vulnerability that surprised her. "Her name is Sophia," he said. "She is the most important person in my world, and she has been through more pain than I can describe. Her mother passed away 2 years ago, and since then, Sophia has struggled to trust anyone. She has had tutors, nannies, therapists. None of them have been able to reach her." He paused, and his voice dropped. "She barely speaks anymore. She spends most of her time alone in her room, drawing pictures of places she has never been. She is slipping away from me, and I do not know how to bring her back." Elena felt something shift inside her chest. The fear and suspicion she had carried into this meeting began to give way to something else. Compassion, understanding, the recognition of a pain she knew all too well. "What happened to her mother?" Elena asked gently. Dominic's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he did not speak. When he finally answered, his voice was carefully controlled. "She was taken from us by people who wanted to hurt me by hurting the ones I love. Sophia was there when it happened. She saw things no child should ever see. He looked at Elena, and his eyes held a rawness that made her breath catch. I failed to protect them. I will not fail again. Elena understood then that this man, for all his power and reputation, was haunted by the same fears that haunted ordinary people. The fear of loss, the fear of inadequacy, the fear that love, no matter how strong, could not always shield the ones we cherished from the cruelties of the world. I am not a therapist, Elena said carefully. I do not have training in child psychology or trauma recovery. I am just a woman who grew up poor and learned how to survive. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. That is exactly why I want you. Sophia does not need another professional who treats her like a case study. She needs someone real, someone who understands that life is hard and that strength is not about pretending otherwise. He paused. When I saw you standing in that hallway last night, refusing to let that entitled fool take your dignity, I saw someone who knows how to keep going even when everything hurts. That is what my daughter needs. Someone who can show her that pain does not have to be the end of the story. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, weighing his words against her own doubts and fears. She thought about Sophia, a little girl trapped in grief and trauma, waiting for someone to find a way into her heart. She thought about her own mother, who had worked her fingers to the bone so that Elena could have a future. She thought about the worn shoes and the laughter and the choice that had brought her to this moment. I have conditions, Elena said finally. Dominic raised an eyebrow but did not object. Name them. First, I need to meet Sophia before I agree to anything. If she does not want me there, I will leave and we will pretend this conversation never happened. Second, I will not lie to her or manipulate her. If she asks me questions, I will answer honestly, even if the truth is uncomfortable. Third, I am not your employee in any other capacity. I am there for Sophia and only for Sophia. Whatever else happens in this house, I am not part of it. Dominic studied her for a long moment, and something like admiration flickered in his grey eyes. Agreed, he said. All three conditions. He rose from his desk and gestured toward the door. Shall we meet her now? Eleanor stood, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Let's go. They walked through the corridors of the house in silence, passing staff members who nodded respectfully but asked no questions. The artwork on the walls shifted as they moved deeper into the residence, from landscapes to something softer, watercolors of flowers, a painting of a sunset over a quiet beach. The kind of images that might comfort a child who had seen too much darkness. Dominic stopped in front of a door decorated with a small wooden plaque in the shape of a butterfly. He knocked gently, and after a long pause, a small voice answered from inside. Come in. The room beyond was filled with light and color. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with picture books and novels and art supplies. A large window overlooked the garden, and in front of it sat a small desk covered with sheets of paper and colored pencils. And in the center of the room, perched on a window seat with her knees drawn up to her chest, was Sophia Vance. She was a beautiful child, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the same storm gray as her father's. But her gaze held a wariness that no 8-year-old should possess, a guardedness that spoke of wounds too deep for words. She looked at Elena without speaking, her small hands clutching a stuffed rabbit with worn ears. Dominic crouched down, to his daughter's level, his voice gentle in a way that transformed him entirely. Sophia, sweetheart, this is Elena. I told you someone was coming to meet you today. She is very kind, and she wanted to say hello. Sophia's eyes remained fixed on Elena, assessing her with the caution of a child who had learned that adults could not always be trusted. Elena felt the weight of that gaze and knew that the next few moments would determine everything. She did not try to smile. She did not try to be warm, or charming or reassuring. Instead, she simply met Sophia's eyes and spoke the truth. I like your rabbit, Elena said quietly. He looks like he has been through a lot, like he has seen some hard things but kept going anyway. Sophia's grip on the rabbit tightened, but something shifted in her expression. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. "Her name is Luna," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was my mom's before she was mine." Elena nodded slowly. "That makes her very special, then. She carries your mother's love with her." Sophia stared at Elena for a long moment, and the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken understanding. Then, so quietly that Elena almost missed it, the little girl spoke again. "Do you want to see my drawings?" Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." And so, in a room filled with light and color, and the quiet presence of a father who watched from the doorway, with hope he barely dared to feel, Elena Reyes began to build a bridge to a little girl who had forgotten how to trust. The drawings were scattered across the desk and pinned to a corkboard on the wall. Houses with red doors, gardens full of butterflies, a woman with long dark hair standing beside a little girl. Elena looked at each one carefully, taking her time, treating them with the respect they deserved. "This one is beautiful," she said, pointing to a watercolor of a sunset. "The colors are so warm. It makes me feel peaceful just looking at it." Sophia climbed down from the window seat and approached slowly, still clutching Luna. "That's the beach," she said. "Mom used to take me there. Before." Elena nodded. "It sounds like she loved you very much." Sophia's eyes filled with something that was not quite tears. "She did. She loved me more than anything." Elena knelt down so she was at Sophia's level, meeting those grey eyes with all the gentleness she possessed. "I believe you," she said, "and I think she still does. Love like that does not go away. It stays with us even when the person is not here anymore. It lives in places like this rabbit and these drawings and your memories." Sophia looked at her for a long moment, searching Elena's face for any sign of insincerity or patronization. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she took a small step closer. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Just for a little while." Elena glanced at Dominic, who stood in the doorway with an expression she could not quite read. Then she looked back at Sophia and made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." The weeks that followed were a study in patience and small victories. Elena moved into a guest suite in the east wing of the house, close enough to Sophia's room to be available whenever the little girl needed her, but far enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. She learned the rhythms of the Vance household, the quiet efficiency of the staff, the careful choreography of security protocols that operated like an invisible second layer beneath the surface of daily life. Dominic was often absent during the day, attending to business matters that Elena made a point of not asking about. Their agreement had been clear, and she intended to honor it. But in the evenings he would appear at dinner, sitting across from his daughter with an attentiveness that never wavered, even when Sophia barely spoke. He asked about her day, her drawings, her lessons. He listened to every word she offered, no matter how few, as if each syllable was precious. Elena watched their interactions with growing understanding. This was not a man who viewed his daughter as a possession or an obligation. This was a father consumed by love and guilt, desperate to repair a bond that trauma had fractured. And slowly, tentatively, Sophia began to respond. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into Elena's tenure. She and Sophia were sitting in the garden, surrounded by flowers that Elena had learned were Mrs. Chen's passion project. Sophia was drawing as she often did, her pencil moving across the paper with careful precision. Elena sat beside her, reading a book, but keeping one eye on the little girl. "Elena," Sophia said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes, sweetheart?" Sophia hesitated, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. "Do you have a mom?" Elena set down her book, giving Sophia her full attention. "I do. Her name is Carmen. She lives in an apartment across the city. She works very hard cleaning offices at night." Sophia considered this information. "Does she love you?" "More than anything," Elena said softly, "just like your mum loved you." Sophia was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on her drawing. Then she said something that made Elena's heart ache with its simple honesty. "I miss her," Sophia whispered. "I miss her every day. And sometimes I get scared that I will forget what she looked like, what she sounded like, what it felt like when..." She hugged me. Elena moved closer, careful not to crowd the little girl but offering her presence as comfort. "Can I tell you something?" she asked gently. Sophia nodded. "My grandmother passed away when I was about your age, and I used to be so scared of the same thing, scared that I would forget her voice, her smile, the way she called me Mija. But here is what I learned, and it took me a long time to understand it." She paused, making sure Sophia was listening. "We do not forget the people we love. Not really. They become part of who we are. The things they taught us, the love they gave us, the way they made us feel safe. All of that stays with us forever. Sometimes we might not be able to picture their face as clearly as we used to, but we can always feel them. Right here." She placed her hand over her heart. "They live in our hearts, and that is something no one can ever take away." Sophia stared at Elena, her grey eyes shimmering with unshed tears. And then, for the first time since Elena had arrived, the little girl reached out and took her hand. They sat together in the garden, hand in hand, as the afternoon sun painted the flowers in shades of gold. And in that moment, something beautiful began to take root, not just between Elena and Sophia, but in the very fabric of the Vance household. A sense of hope, a possibility of healing, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, love could find a way to bloom. This is where I ask something of you, beautiful soul listening to this story. If Sophia's words touched your heart, if you have ever felt the ache of missing someone you love, leave a comment right now with the words, "She lives in my heart." Let us create a space where we honor the people who shaped us and remind each other that love never truly ends. As the days passed, Eleanor began to notice changes that extended beyond her relationship with Sophia. The staff, who had initially treated her with polite distance, began to warm to her presence. Mrs. Chen would occasionally pause to share stories about the garden, about the history of the house, about the small moments of joy that punctuated life in the Vance estate. The security personnel, ever watchful, would nod in acknowledgement when she passed, a subtle recognition that she belonged. But the most significant change was in Dominic himself. He began to appear more often during the day, finding reasons to check on Sophia's progress, to observe the activities Elena had planned, to participate in, moments that had previously been inaccessible to him. He read bedtime stories, while Eleanor sat in the corner of Sophia's room, her presence a bridge that made the little girl feel safe enough to accept her father's love. He joined them for breakfast on Saturday mornings, listening as Sophia chatted about her drawings and her dreams, and the butterfly she had seen in the garden. And slowly, the wall between father and daughter began to crumble. One evening, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Dominic found Elena in the library, curled up in an armchair with a book. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret. "May I join you?" he asked. Elena looked up, surprised by the question. It was the first time he had sought her company outside of matters related to Sophia. "Of course," she said. Dominic settled into the chair across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. He was silent for a long moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "What you are doing for Sophia," he said finally. "It is more than I could have hoped for. I have watched her transform over these past weeks. She laughs now. She talks. She told me yesterday that she wants to show me her drawings." He paused, and his voice dropped. "She has not wanted to share her drawings with anyone since her mother died." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "She is an extraordinary child. All she needed was someone to see her. To really see her." "You see her," Dominic said, "and you see me too, I think, even though I have given you every reason to look away." Elena met his gaze, struck by the vulnerability in his words. "I see a father who loves his daughter more than his own life. I see a man who carries guilt he does not deserve. I see someone who built walls to protect himself, but is slowly learning to let them down. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes fixed on hers. "And what do you see in yourself?" he asked softly. Eleanor considered the question. "A woman who spent her whole life believing she was not good enough. A woman who let other people define her worth." She paused, and her voice grew stronger. "But that is changing. Being here, being with Sophia, I am starting to see myself differently. I am starting to believe that I have something valuable to offer." Dominic leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. "You have more than something valuable to offer, Elena. You have the rarest gift I have ever encountered. You have the ability to make people feel seen, to make them feel like they matter, to make them believe that healing is possible." He paused. "Sophia is not the only one you have reached." Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. The air between them was charged with something unspoken, something that had been building since the night they first met in that shadowy corridor. "Dominic," she said carefully. "I know," he said, holding up a hand. "I know what our agreement was, and I will honor it. But I want you to know that you have changed something in this house, something in my daughter, and something in me. Whatever happens, I am grateful." Eleanor nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. She understood what he was saying, and she understood that the feelings stirring inside her own heart were complicated, tangled with duty and danger, and the undeniable truth that she was falling for a man whose world was nothing like her own. They sat together in the firelight, two people bound by circumstance and something deeper, as the night wrapped around the house like a protective embrace. The day everything changed began like any other. Eleanor woke early, prepared Sophia's breakfast, and supervised her morning lessons with the tutor who came 3 times a week. The little girl was making remarkable progress, not just academically but emotionally. She smiled more often now. She initiated conversations. She had even begun to venture outside her room voluntarily, exploring the house with Luna clutched in one arm, and Elena's hand held tightly in the other. After lunch, Elena received a message from Mrs. Chen asking her to come to the main study. The request was unusual, and a flicker of unease passed through Elena as she made her way through the familiar corridors. When she arrived, she found not just Dominic but 2 other men she did not recognize. They were dressed in dark suits, their expressions carefully blank in a way that spoke of professional training. Dominic stood behind his desk, his face set, in the hard lines she remembered from their first meeting, but when he looked at Elena, something softened in his eyes. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. "There is something I need to tell you." Elena sat, her heart beginning to pound with apprehension. "What is happening?" Dominic exchanged a glance with one of the men, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We have received intelligence," Dominic said carefully, "about a threat to this household. It is not immediate, but it is serious enough that I am taking precautionary measures." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "A threat? Is Sophia in danger?" "Everyone in this house is potentially at risk," Dominic said, "including you." He held up a hand before she could speak. "That is why I am telling you this. You have a choice, Elena. I can arrange for you to leave immediately, to return to your apartment with protection until this situation is resolved. No one would blame you for choosing safety." "And Sophia?" Elena asked, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Sophia stays with me. I have tripled the security detail, and this house is built to withstand any assault. She will be safe." Elena looked at the 2 men, then back at Dominic. The choice he was offering was clear. She could walk away from the danger, return to her normal life, protect herself from whatever storm was approaching. It was the sensible option, the safe option. But when she thought of Sophia, of the little girl who had finally begun to trust, who had finally begun to heal, she knew there was really no choice at all. "I am staying," Eleanor said. Dominic's expression flickered with something that might have been relief or gratitude or something deeper. "Are you certain?" Eleanor met his gaze without wavering. "I am not leaving that little girl. Whatever comes, I will face it with her." The days that followed were tense with quiet preparation. Eleanor noticed the changes even as she tried to maintain normalcy for Sophia's sake. More. Security personnel patrolled the grounds. The staff moved with increased urgency, and Dominic, when he appeared, carried a weight in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. But despite the undercurrent of danger, life in the Vance household continued. Elena and Sophia planted flowers in the garden, their hands covered in soil as they laughed about the worm Sophia had discovered. They baked cookies in the massive kitchen, filling the house with warmth and sweetness. They read stories before bed, Sophia's head resting against Elena's shoulder, as the little girl drifted into peaceful sleep. And somewhere in the midst of fear and uncertainty, something beautiful continued to grow. It was on the fourth evening that Elena found Dominic standing alone in the garden, his back to the house, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine. She approached, quietly, not wanting to startle him. He turned at her footsteps, and for a moment the mask he wore for the world slipped away, revealing the exhausted, worried man beneath. "You should be inside," he said. "So should you," Elena replied. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair point. They stood together in silence, watching the sunset. The beauty of it seemed almost defiant, a reminder that even in dark times, the world continued to offer moments of grace. "I have been thinking," Dominic said, "finally, about what happens after this is over, about what kind of life I want to build for Sophia, for myself." He turned to look at Elena, and his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have shown me that there is another way to live. Not just surviving, not just protecting, but actually living, finding joy, building something that matters." Eleanor felt her heart begin to race. "Dominic, I know it is complicated," he said. "I know my world is dangerous and my past is dark. I know you deserve someone simpler, someone whose hands are clean. But I cannot pretend anymore." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. "You are the first person in years who has made me believe that I could be something more than what I have been, and I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you." Eleanor looked up at him, this man who had surprised her at every turn, who had shown her tenderness beneath strength, who had trusted her with the most precious thing in his life. She thought about her worn shoes and the laughter that had brought them together. She thought about Sophia and the butterfly drawings and the words spoken in the garden. She thought about the person she had become in this house, the person she was still becoming. "I am not going anywhere," she said quietly. Dominic reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle but sure. And in that moment, standing in the fading light of sunset, something that had been building for weeks finally crystallized into truth. They were no longer just employer and caregiver. They were something more, something that neither of them had expected, but both of them had been seeking. A partnership, a promise. The beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. But as they stood there, hand in hand, neither of them noticed the shadow that moved at the edge of the property. Neither of them saw the camera that captured their moment of vulnerability, and neither of them knew that the storm they had been preparing for was about to arrive. The attack came not as an assault of force, but as a precision strike designed to wound without leaving obvious scars. On a Friday morning, as Elena was preparing Sophia for her art lesson, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway with an expression that made Elena's stomach drop. "There is a visitor," Mrs. Chen said carefully. "He is in the main study with Mr. Vance. He says he knows you." Elena felt ice spread through her veins. "Who is it?" Mrs. Chen hesitated. He introduced himself as Bradley Lancaster. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. For a moment she could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stand frozen as the memories of that humiliating night came flooding back. "Elena," Sophia said, tugging at her hand, "are you okay? You look scared." Elena forced herself to take a breath, to steady her racing heart. "I am fine, sweetheart. Just surprised by something." She knelt down to Sophia's level. "I need to go speak with your father for a few minutes. Can you stay here with Mrs. Chen and work on your drawing? Sophia looked uncertain, but she nodded. Luna and I will wait for you. Elena walked through the corridors of the house she had come to love, her mind racing with questions and fears. Why was Bradley here? How did he know where to find her? And what possible reason could he have for seeking her out after all this time? When she entered the study, she found Dominic standing behind his desk with his arms crossed over his chest, his expression carved from stone. Bradley Lancaster sat in one of the leather chairs, looking as perfectly groomed and arrogantly confident as Elena remembered. When he saw her, his lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Elena," he said, rising to his feet, "I was just telling your employer about our history." He gestured around the study with studied casualness. "Impressive digs. Much nicer than the Lancaster estate, actually. I can see why you traded up." Dominic's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You will speak to her with respect, or you will not speak at all." Bradley's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Easy there, big guy. I am just here to deliver a message." He pulled out his phone and held it up so Elena could see the screen. A photograph of her and Dominic in the garden, their hands intertwined, the sunset painting them in golden light. Pretty romantic, right? I have about 50 more just like it. Different angles, different moments. Really tells a story. Elena felt the room spin. "How did you—" Bradley shrugged. "I have friends who specialize in acquiring information. When I heard that the woman I humiliated at my mother's party was now living with one of the most powerful men in the city, I got curious, and what I found was very interesting indeed." He leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malice. "The press is going to love this. Mafia boss seduces immigrant maid. It practically writes itself." Dominic moved around the desk with controlled precision, his movements slow and deliberate. "And what exactly do you want?" Bradley's smile widened. "I want a lot of things. But for starters, I want the satisfaction of watching her squirm." He looked at Eleanor, and the cruelty in his gaze made her skin crawl. "You thought you could just walk away from what happened that night. You thought you could rise above your station and forget who you are." He shook his head mockingly. "People like you do not get happy endings, Elena. Not with men like him, and I am going to make sure everyone knows it." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stood frozen, shame and fear warring with the anger that had begun to build in her chest. This was what Bradley wanted, she realized. He wanted to see her broken. He wanted to prove that no matter how far she had come, she was still the woman with the worn shoes, the easy target, the entertainment for the evening. But she was not that woman anymore. "You came all this way," Helena said slowly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "to threaten me with photographs, to try to humiliate me again." She took a step forward, and something in her posture made Bradley take an involuntary step back. "You think I am afraid of what people will say about me? You think I care about the opinions of society pages and gossip columns?" Bradley's confidence wavered. "I am warning you." "No," Eleanor cut him off. "I am warning you." She moved closer, and now she was the one who held the power in the room. "I have spent my whole life being underestimated by people like you, being looked down on, being treated like I do not matter, and for a long time I believed it. I believed that the accident of birth determined worth, that money and status were the only measures of value." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "But I do not believe that anymore, because I have seen real strength, real courage, real love, and none of it has anything to do with the size of your bank account or the brand of your shoes." Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but Dominic spoke first, his voice quiet and more dangerous than any shout. "I believe you have outstayed your welcome," he said. "My security team will escort you to the gate, and if I ever see you near this property again, or near Elena, or near anyone I care about, you will discover exactly why people are careful when they speak my name." Bradley looked between them, and for the first time his composure cracked completely. The smug confidence drained away, replaced by the realization that he had badly miscalculated. He was not dealing with frightened service staff or intimidated rivals. He was dealing with people who had nothing left to prove and everything they loved to protect. "This is not over," he sputtered as two security personnel appeared at the door. "Yes," Dominic said simply, "it is." They watched as Bradley was escorted from the study, his protests fading as he was led toward the front gate. When the door closed behind him, the silence settled around them like a blanket. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to fade. She felt Dominic's hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. Elena turned to look at him, and despite everything, she found herself smiling. "I learned from the best." Dominic's eyes searched her. "Face, are you all right?" She considered the question. The photographs were still out there. Bradley could still cause trouble. The threat had not disappeared simply because she had stood her ground. But for the first time in her life, Elena understood that her worth was not determined by the opinions of others. It was determined by her own choices, her own courage, her own capacity for love. "I am more than all right," she said. "I am finally free." And as Dominic pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home, Elena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the strength she had discovered within herself. The months that followed were not without difficulty. Bradley's photographs found their way to a tabloid website, accompanied by salacious headlines and speculation. Elena's face appeared on screens across the city, and for a brief period she became the subject of public curiosity and judgment. But the storm passed more quickly than anyone expected. The public, it turned out, was far more interested in the story of a single father devoted to his daughter, a woman of humble origins who had captured his heart, and a little girl who was finally learning to smile again. The narrative that Bradley had hoped to weaponize transformed into something unexpected, a story of hope, of second chances, of love that transcended social boundaries. Elena's mother, Carmen, visited the Vance estate for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in spring. She was nervous as she walked through the gates, uncertain of what she would find in this world so different from her own. But when Sophia came running across the lawn with Luna in her arms, chattering excitedly about the flowers she and Elena had planted, Carmen understood. Her daughter had found a family. The transformation in Sophia continued to unfold like a flower opening to the sun. She returned to school for the first time since her mother's passing, tentative at first, but growing more confident with each passing week. She made friends. She learned to trust teachers and classmates and the security of routine, and every evening she would curl up on the sofa between Elena and Dominic, telling them about her day, sharing her drawings, asking the endless questions that 8-year-old minds produce. "She calls you Mama Elena now," Dominic observed one night after Sophia had gone to bed. The firelight played across his face, softening the lines that had once seemed so hard. Elena smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "She started about 2 weeks ago. I did not correct her." She looked at him uncertain. "Is that all right?" Dominic reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with a gentleness that still surprised her. "It is more than all right. It is everything I hoped for when I gave you that business card in the hallway of the Lancaster mansion." Elena laughed softly. "You could not have possibly known any of this would happen." "I knew you were remarkable," he said. "I knew." Sophia needed someone who would see her for who she was, not who her trauma had made her. "And I knew—" He paused, his grey eyes finding hers. "I knew that meeting you felt like the first moment of genuine hope I had experienced in years." The proposal came on a warm evening in June, 1 year to the day since Elena had first arrived at the Vance estate. Dominic had arranged a dinner in the garden, the table surrounded by the flowers Elena had planted, the air sweet with jasmine and the promise of summer. Sophia was there, of course. She was part of everything now, woven into the fabric of their lives so completely that imagining the family without her was impossible. She sat at the table with Luna on her lap, her grey eyes bright with excitement. She knew what was coming, Dominic had told her that morning, and she had kept the secret with the fierce determination of a child who understood that something magical was about to happen. "Elena," Dominic said, standing and taking both her hands in his. "When I met you, I was a man lost in darkness. I had power and wealth and the respect born of fear, but I had lost the thing that mattered most. I had lost hope." He paused, and his voice thickened with emotion. "You gave that back to me, not just for myself, but for my daughter. You taught us both that it was safe to love again, that it was possible to build something beautiful even after everything had been broken." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, a single diamond catching the evening light. "I am not asking you to marry the man I was," he said. "I am asking you to marry the man I am becoming, the man you helped me become. Will you do me the honor of building a life with us, with Sophia and me?" Eleanor looked at him, this man who had surprised her at every turn, who had shown her that strength and tenderness were not opposites but partners, who had trusted her with his most precious treasure and had become her own treasure in return. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, strong enough for Sophia to hear, for the garden to hear, for the whole world to hear. "Yes, I will." Sophia launched herself from her chair with a shriek of joy, throwing her arms around both of them, in an embrace that made Elena's heart overflow. Dominic's arms encircled them both, and for a long moment they stood together in the gathering twilight, a family forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the courage to believe in second chances. The wedding was held in the garden 3 months later, a small ceremony attended by the people who mattered most. Elena's mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter exchange vows with the man who had seen her worth when no one else had. Mrs. Chen stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The security team formed a discreet perimeter, their vigilance a constant reminder that this family existed within a world of careful protection. But on this day there was no danger, only joy. Sophia served as flower girl, scattering petals along the path with careful concentration, Luna tucked under one arm as always. When she reached the altar, she turned to face the gathered guests and announced in a voice clear and proud, "My dad is marrying my mama Elena today, and we are going to be a family forever." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, a celebration of love that had survived loss, transcended difference, and proven stronger than fear. After the ceremony, as the sun began to set and the garden filled with golden light, Elena found a quiet moment with Dominic. They stood together at the edge of the lawn, looking out over the grounds that had become her home. "I was thinking about my shoes," she said softly. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Your shoes?" Eleanor smiled. "The ones Bradley laughed at, the worn ones I was wearing the night we met." She turned to look at him, her eyes shimmering. "I kept them. They are in a box in my closet." "Why?" Dominic asked, genuinely curious. "Because they remind me of who I was, and who I became." She took his hand, pressing her palm against his. "Those shoes carried me through years of struggle. They carried me to the Lancaster mansion where I met you. They carried me through shame and humiliation and the moment when I could have given up." She paused. "And now they remind me that the journey matters as much as the destination. That every step, even the painful ones, was leading me here." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you know why I sent those 100 pairs of shoes?" Elena shook her head. "Because I wanted the world to know that what Bradley Lancaster saw as weakness, I saw as strength. That the woman he mocked for her worn shoes was worth 100 times more than his entire fortune." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her palm. "You were already extraordinary, Elena. You did not need new shoes to prove it. But I wanted you to have them anyway. I wanted you to know that from that moment forward, you would never have to walk any path alone." Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of a joy so complete it seemed to fill every corner of her soul. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," Dominic replied. "Always." The reception continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and dancing and the warm glow of family and friends. Sophia stayed up far past her bedtime, twirling across the dance floor in her flower girl dress, her face alight with happiness. And when the last guests had departed and the garden fell quiet, Elena stood at the window of the bedroom she now shared with Dominic, looking out at the stars that dusted the sky like scattered diamonds. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the struggles and sacrifices, the moments of doubt and the moments of courage, the worn shoes and the laughter and the business card pressed into her hand by a stranger in a shadowy hallway. She thought about her mother, who had worked so hard to give her opportunities, about her grandmother, whose wisdom still echoed in her heart, about Sophia, who had taught her that healing was always possible, that love was always worth the risk. And she thought about Dominic, who had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself, who had offered her not just protection, but partnership, not just shelter, but home. The stars continued their slow dance across the heavens, indifferent to the small dramas of human life. But Elena knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that the universe was not indifferent at all. It had conspired in ways she would never fully understand to bring her to this moment, this place, this love. She was home. If you have watched this far, it is because this story touched your heart. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel." Your support means the world to us. If you felt moved by Elena's journey, by Sophia's healing, by the love that transformed a family, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every story we tell is crafted with love, designed to inspire, and meant to remind you that no matter where you come from, no matter what you have been through, your story is still being written. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for believing in hope. Until the next story.